Hello and welcome. Our session is entitled Getting Starting Grazing and has been developed by Caitlin Turner, Cliff Little, and myself. I'll allow Caitlin to introduce herself at the second part of the presentation. Cliff is an associate professor with Ohio State University Extension working in Guernsey County. He has used his expertise to develop the initial slide set that we will be using tonight. My name is Michelle Stumbo. I have worked for OSU Extension in Meigs County since 2012, but have only been working with the Ag and Natural Resources programs for the last couple years. I'm looking forward to learning with you as my family looks to continue renovating the family farm. While it is not a huge operation by any means, my sister and I have worked hard to get the house and buildings in better shape on our 10 little acres of Southern Ohio. We're looking forward to starting working on pastures in the next several years. You should now be viewing the presentation screen. In this presentation, we will look at some important factors related to a grazing system. This presentation does make some assumptions, including that you have identified the mission, vision, and goals for your livestock system. If you've not done that yet, you may want to take a break and contact your extension educator, NRCS, or Soil and Water for some more information. We will deal specifically with the pasture system. It's recommended that once the initial grazing plan is roughed out, that the livestock producer contact USDA NRCS office to request a written grazing plan. One of your first steps should be to obtain an aerial map of the pasture resource so that you can lay out where things will be and think about how things need to be changed. In developing your grazing plan, you have planned your rotation, identified where you need the animals to be during the seasons, and planned your winter feeding area and emergency feeding area. In doing so, you're assessing the water types that should be in these given areas as well. For example, we know that our winter feeding site is located here in the aerial, and we know that we need an abundant frost-free water system. The size of the tank may not need to be as large as animals will be near the source. We would like the water to have access to a southern aspect, providing solar energy, i.e. you don't have to go out and defrost it as much. Here, the blue dots represent the water sources. Each will have to be sized for the number of animals using the source and the distance being traveled. Position sources, particularly in winter feeding areas, so that they are exposed to winter sun. The plan does not need to be complete. It is only intended to get the producer focused on the system so that later they can sit down with a grazing planner and develop a more comprehensive system. So some key points that you need to think about at this point are where your water distribution is, how you're planning your rotation, 1 to 7 day rotation per paddock, ideally 3 days or less for maximum forage utilization, with enough paddocks to provide a 30-day rest period for each. And then you need to look at developing a winter feeding area. To obtain that aerial map that you saw in the last view, you can go to the Web Soil Survey website, and we are going to go there just a moment, if I can switch screens quickly, and see what that site looks like. So when you first go there, you'll see this green button right at the top that says Start WSS. So in that, it'll ask you for an address and information. So I've already zoomed in on our little neck of the woods here. And you'll notice that the soil map and soil data exporter are not live views at this point. So if you go to the define AOI, you need to define an area of interest for the website to look at. If you click that button, it will let you pick sites. So I'm going to quickly define the rough areas of our land that we're looking at. And even when it's not exactly a square shape, so we have this little cutout for this house that happens to be mine. And you can cut around that relatively easily. So I've defined my area of interest. And now that soil map becomes a live clickable site that you can click on. So this system does not recommend going down to the zoomed in for the small number of acres that we have. But after looking at this, it's not far off. So this area right here is where they're saying that is a steep section of our property. However, that right there is not the steep section. You can actually see that it's lawn, and that's what we've worked out with our neighbor who is terrified of snakes, and mows a little bit of the top part where it's flat so that they can see them coming towards their house if they ever decide to attack en masse. But the steep part that is referring to is actually right in here. So it's really close, and everything else is pretty close on the map. So you'll get a pretty good outline, and you can export that and use that as part of your conversation. Okay, so again, that resource is a free one that you can use, and it's relatively easy to work around that system once you figure out what they want. So as you start the process, after you've got your aerial map and mapped out where your current sources are, you'll want to do a pasture assessment. And this will take a couple times walking through and seeing what you find. And maybe looking in those corners that you don't often see unless there's a reason to go there. So how does the pasture look? Identifying any problems, bare spots, a soil test. We have sent out for a soil test on our pasture. We're waiting for those results. And then finally, evaluating the pasture utilizing the pasture condition score sheet. So taking a look at this grazing resource allows us to prioritize the areas that need work and measure progress. So again, I'm going to switch to that screen and show you what that actually looks like. So you should be seeing the Grazing Lands Technology Institute Pasture Condition Score Sheet from the National Resource Conservation Service. And so it'll give you pretty good instructions on how to use it. And however, we are going to kind of skip over some of this and go to the part that everyone skips to anyway, which is the sheet that you actually do. But there is some good information involved. So you have several indicators that you're going to use to evaluate your pasture, including percent desirable plants, plant cover, plant diversity, plant residue, plant vigor, percent legumes in the pasture, uniformity of use, livestock concentration areas, soil compaction, and erosion. And then there's some additional information on erosion. So when we did this for our particular pastures, which we've mentioned have not been well maintained in the last couple of years. So we were really low on plant diversity, and we were pretty low on percent legumes because there have just not been many planted in the past several years. So that's kind of where we're looking at starting. Those were our two lowest scoring areas, and they're connected. So that's where we're looking at starting this spring, summer on adding some renovation in and putting some different plants in there to increase those scores. So from this sheet, we will go back to the slide set. So next is we make our plans on what needs renovated and what needs renovated first, and what changes you want to make first in your processes. Plan for the future. And I know that might sound silly, but we want to make a plan that's going to last us for the next 5, 10 to 15 years. We don't want to have to reevaluate every other year on this, except for making sure what we're doing is working, and if you need to change anything, making those changes as we go. So you want to identify the type of livestock utilized in the grazing system, and that might be added later. So for instance, we've kind of decided to go with goats for right now because that's what will eat some of the junk that's in our pastures. They really like multiflora rows, the scrub goats. So we have goats right now, but that might not ultimately be our plan, and we need to plan our facilities and our layouts for those, what we're going for in the future. Realistically, we've kind of decided we like goats, so we'll probably keep those. But we need to make changes based on what we want to happen and not maybe where we are right now. Because that obviously affects what systems you're going to put in place. So it affects fencing needs. So if we're going to keep goats, when we refence, we obviously need smaller fencing. We need all the way to the ground, as we might not would if we were doing something, if we were doing other species. That helps with our water systems, that helps with rotation schedules, and a lot of other factors. So one of your next step is going to be just identifying and visiting some grazing farms that you think have good systems in place. So utilize NRCS, your soil and water conservation districts, and OSU Extension to help you find some of those local producers that have a system in place that might be similar to what you're looking at. So you might find a local producer that has alpacas if you're interested in that, or a local producer that has a really solid cow-calf operation that they're utilizing good information for. So when visiting those farms, you're going to carefully observe some things that you're going to want to utilize later. So you're going to want to take a look at fencing, housing, how they utilize pastures, how they rotate things, how they store hay and manure, how they handling facilities and winter feeding areas. All those things are going to be things that you're going to look at and try to copy what you like and change what you don't like when you look at your own property. Thanks so much for following along so far. I'll now turn it over to Caitlin Turner to finish up our presentation. Thanks again for listening.